Maaari na pong maupo ang lahat. Magandang umaga sa lahat at malugod namin kayong tinatanggap sa Pandaigdigang Komperensiya sa nanganganib na wika dito sa Pambansang Museo, Museum of Natural History. Napakahalaga ng ating komperensyang naglalayong tipunin ang mga prominenteng iskolar sa pananaliksik upang magbahagi ng kaalaman hinggil sa wika, dokumentasyon at muling pagbuhay ng wika. Sa paglalatag nila sa hapag ng ating kamalayan, inaasahan nating mapitas ang pinakamahuhusay na paraan ng pananaliksik at pagbuo ng programa upang maharap natin ang mga issue sa estado ng ating mga wika. At sa huli, inaasahan din tayong makabuo ng plano tungo sa pagsasagawa ng konkretong proyekto para sa ating mga nanganganib na wika. Ulitin ko po sa ibang paraan, mga konkretong proyekto para sa ating natatanging pamanang pangkulturang nanganganib, ang mga katutubong wika ng Pilipinas. Tungo ito sa hangarin nating makabuo ng isang pambansang agenda para sa pangangalaga sa mga wika ng Pilipinas, isang dalisay na layunin ng mga tunay na naglilingkod para sa wika at kulturang Filipino. Ang ating komperensya ay tinataguyod ng Komisyon sa Wikang Filipino, ang tanggapan ni Senador Loren Legarda, sa pakikipagtulungan ng Pambansang Museo ng Pilipinas. Salubungin natin ang palakpakan ng mensahe mula sa Pambansang Museo, ang mensahe ng ating minamahal na Director Jeremy Barnes na babasahin ni Dr. Ana Maria Teresa Labrador, Assistant Director ng Pambansang Museo ng Pilipinas.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that you are all here. I will speak in English. Sorry if you spoke so well. So, but I guess because we have an international audience, and so we would like to also address you. National Artist Virgilio Almario, Professor Michael Walsh, Professors Gregory D.S. Anderson, Peter Austin, Ganesh Devi, Patrick Heinrich, and all our, Larry Kimura also, and our distinguished guests. Welcome to the National Museum of Natural History. This is part of our campus within the Rizal Park. And actually, we would like you to invite you firsthand to go to our other museums within this area. Just let our staff know they're all wearing National Museum uniforms, so they can take you around if you would like to see the Spoliarium of Juan Luna and our textile collection in the National Museum of Anthropology. We also have a Baybayin gallery in the other building, so you might want to look at the ancient and traditional scripts. I don't really have a prepared speech from Director Barnes, but I would like to actually talk to you about my own experience. I'm actually a social anthropologist, and I'm probably one of the few people who can speak and understand Fontok, which is the language of the mountain province in the middle areas. No? The Ifontok actually think of themselves as the center of the world. And they're very proud of that. No? And I went there to do my field research in 1996. And I stayed there because I was in a British university. I had to stay there for more than a year so that I can learn their language and be part of the woodwork. And as you know, most of you who are field workers would know that I had a lot of mishaps and all that. And I'm not very good at learning languages, actually. And so what I did was painstakingly record my interviews and prayers and all these things that I was recording, intangible heritage. And then at night, I would transcribe all of them, even if I don't understand what they are. And then the following day, I would go to we used to call them informants, but now are partners in research, and then they would help me understand. And it's really a lesson in humility, because I felt really stupid doing the transcription and translation. But the other thing also that I would like to say is that we are very, very really worried about the languages in the Philippines. We are so proud that we have 200 ethno-linguistic groups. But there's very little effort, and I'm glad that this conference is happening this week, because not much has been done to really exert the effort to encourage people to speak. No? So again, going back to my Bontoc experience, after I passed my dissertation, I went back there, and then the impact of, for instance, television and mass media was so great that the small children started speaking already in Filipino. What was the Tagalog, no? What was the saving grace for that occasion is that I saw that they were already making fun of Filipino language, the Philippine, not their own language, no? So much like what we do as Tagalog speakers, for instance, we make fun and pun of English, no? So that sort of thing. But I would really be very sad if fewer people speak the Bontoc language, and we have to approach this in an interdisciplinary way, no, not just in the linguistic way, but really trying to make sure that the indigenous people survive, no, and they're very important. The one thing that we have invested recently in our research program is to look at groups of people that are far away from the center. This notion of being further away from, for instance, the cosmopolitan cities. And we actually have an exhibition opening next week on the Negritos. And we're so glad that we have managed to work with the communities all over the Philippines in that regard. And we are really worried about also the diminishing and the lack of attention to their own practices. So we hope by putting out exhibitions like this one, and then other groups that we have represented in our collection, that we can create a debate, we can discuss about these things, and move forward in terms of how we may engage them. There was one instance when we were working with the Lumad of Mindanao, and because they had issues such as ancestral domain claims and all these problems with their land, they actually told us, you take care of our objects, you take care, they're all in your collections, they're probably in air-conditioned rooms, but who will take care of us? And I couldn't answer. It's a difficult question to be posed as a member of the National Museum, as a social anthropologist, as a Filipino. So I guess what will happen here is that we'll have this kind of rich discussions, and I hope that you can share those things with us. Thank you very much.
Yamanak, Director Labrador, sa pagpapaalala sa atin sa halaga ng pag-abot ng sentro sa mga laylayan sa Pilipinas. And you bring honor to the Filipino people every day by opening your doors to our beloved museum goers, Filipinos and foreigners alike. Ngayon ay pakinggan natin ang mensahe ng ating pangunahing tagapagtangkilik ng wika at kulturang Filipino. Para sa pagbasa ng mensahe ng ating minamahal na Senador Loren Villagarda, narito si Pambansang Alagad ng Sining para sa Panitikan at Tagapangulo ng Komisyon sa Wikang Filipino at Pambansang Komisyon para sa Kultura at Mga Sining, Virgilio S. Almario.
Magandang umaga sa inyo lahat. Ang trabaho ko ngayong umaga ay bumasa ng mensahe ng ating Senadora, Loren Ligarda. Pero bago yon, ilang patalastas. Unang-una, ang ating komperensiya ay bahagi ng ginagawa ngayong pagtangkilik ng Komisyon sa Wikang Pilipino sa ating mga wika, lalo na ang ating mga endangered languages. Sa katunayan, meron pa kaming isang programa na sinimulan para sa mga Negrito, by the way, para sa mga Negrito sa Bataan. At ang ginagawa namin doon ay gumagawa kami ng re-education ng mga bata na Negrito ay magbukod sa Bataan para sila ay magkaroon ng interest na gamitin ang kanilang sariling wika. Kasi tulad ng nasabi mo, ay mas Tagalog na ang kanilang sinasalita sa kanilang community. Ngunit what is serendipitous about this now is that the UNESCO recently declared next year as the year for indigenous languages. And that is why what we are doing now, this conference, parang it's just a prelude to to other more important projects that we are going to do next year for the indigenous languages. For example, we are planning to devote our Buwan ng Wika celebration for the studies of not only indigenous languages, but also the what we can say as the intangible cultural heritage of the Philippines. That is why we have formulated for our celebration of the indigenous languages the logo that we have here now. This is a new logo which we are using for the celebration of indigenous languages. We still have in the center, the logo of the Komperensiya sa Wikang Filipino, but instead of W, we have the letter K in our native baybayin, K which stands for Katutubo or native. And then around it, you have designs coming from weaving designs of our indigenous peoples from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Kaya parang parol ang nangyari, di ba? Hindi yan pang Christmas. Para yan sa buong taon natin next year. Anyway, let me go back to my role this morning. I would like to inform you too that this whole conference and the other things that we are doing now for indigenous languages are fully funded by the office of Senator Loren Ligarda. It's very unfortunate that right now she is in another important commitment. That is she is now in Frankfurt for the Frankfurt Book Fair. And she's there to launch a book about Philippine indigenous something. I don't know. I haven't seen the book, but it's about indigenous something in the Philippines also. So, and that is why she cannot attend our conference. So let me read her message. I will read the message in Filipino, but I was told that the English version of this message is also in your program. So for our distinguished guests from abroad, you can follow my oral rendition of the message by reading what is written in your program. So narito ang mensahe para sa atin ni Senator Loren Ligarda. Nakamamangha kung paano napanatiling buhay at matatag ng iba't ibang pangkat etniko sa bansa ang kani-kanilang wika at ugnayang kultural sa kabila ng katotohanang dumaan ito sa napakahabang yugto ng pananakop. Gayunman, hindi maikakailang maraming wika ng minoryang pangkat sa buong kapuluan ang patuloy na lumiliit ang bilang ng mga tagapagsalita. Hindi natin dapat hayaang magpatuloy ito. Kailangang magpamalas ng sigasig ang iba't ibang ahensya ng pamahalaan, pribadong sektor, akademya, mga samahang sibiko at iba pang organisasyon upang matiyak na ligtas at masigla ang linguistic ecosystem sa bansa. Ang ginagawa natin ngayong Pandaigdigang Komperensiya sa nanganganib na wika ay pagpapamalas ng matibay na gulugod ng Komisyon sa Wikang Filipino bilang pangunahing ahensyang may eksklusibong mandato upang itaguyod ang preserbasyon ng mga wika sa buong kapuluan. Hindi na dapat pagtalunan pa kung bakit mahalagang maipreserba ang mga wika ng bawat bansa sa mundo, sapagkat ang pagkawala ng mga ito ay nangangahulugan din ng pagkamatay ng maangking kakanyahan ng mga taong gumagamit ito. Ayon sa United Nations, ang mga wika ang pinakamakapangyarihang kasangkapan upang mapangalagaan at paunlarin pa ang mga material at di material na pamanang pangkultura o ang ating tangible and intangible cultural heritage. Kailangang irespeto sa akademya sa tulong ng mga dalubguro at lingwista ang mga wikang bernakular bilang mabisang wikang panturo o wika ng pagkatuto ng mga mag-aaral sa lahat ng sulok ng bansa. Nararapat iwasan ang pagtangi, pangkutya at paghamak sa isang tao nang dahil lamang sa pagkakaroon ng puntong regional dahil hindi ito isang linguistic defect, kundi isang linguistic identity. Gandang point. Hindi kailanman dapat talikuran ang wikang kinagisnan o mother tongue sa ninang politikal, sosyal at academic pressures. Sa gusto man natin o hindi, mangungusap ang isang tao ayon sa nakagawian sa komunidad na kanyang pinagmulan. Nawa, sa pamamagitan ng komperensyang ito, ay maipahatid natin ng mas malinaw ang kahalagahan ng ating mga katutubong wika at makabuo ng mga hakbang upang mapangalagaan ang mga ito. Hangad ko ang tagumpay ng pagtitipong ito. Yun po ang mensahe ni Senator Ligarda. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat po, Tagapangulong Almario, sa inyong mensahe, sa pagbasa ng mensahe ng ating minamahal na Senador Loren Legarda. At ang mismong senador na po natin na nagpapaalala na wala po sa ating bibig o dila yung mga depekto. The defect is not in our tongues. No, we only need to listen to our fellow men for us to have a further understanding of our identity. Kinikilala rin natin ang pagdalo ng mga individual na kumakatawan sa iba't ibang institusyon sa loob at labas ng Pilipinas. Tumayo po para makilala. Unahin ko na po ang mga kasamahan po nating mga kapwa at lingkod bayan in the government. mula po sa Pambansang Komisyon para sa Kultura at Mga Sining o NCCA. Palakpakan po natin sila. Kasama po natin ang mga lingkod bayan din ng Pambansang Museo na ating host po ngayon. Mula po sa Kagawaran ng Edukasyon, Department of Education. Ang Kagawaran ng Interior at Lokal na Pamahalaan, Department of Interior and Local Government. At ang Pambansang Komisyon Laban sa Kahirapan. Narito na po sila. Sa mga institusyon at organisasyon, kasama rin po natin ang Linguistics Society of the Philippines. Ang Summer Institute of Linguistics. Ang Translators Association of the Philippines. At tumayo po para makilala ang mga kinatawan ng mga universidad, paaralan, kolehiyo sa buong Pilipinas. This is a national conference, an international conference mula po sa National Capital Region, NCR. Ang ating mga kinatawan mula sa NCR, mula po sa Luzon. Mula sa Visayas. At mula sa Mindanao. Buhay po kayo. Salamat po. At ilan lang din pong paalala sa ating pong mga kalahok. Nakasulat na po ang ating mga tuntunin ng mga house rules sa inyong formularyo. Ngunit pangunahin din pong paalala, dalawa lamang po. Wag po nating isaksak ang ating mga gadgets sa socket po ng ating bulwagan. At mag-ingat po tayo sa mga salamin dito po dahil po marami po mga salamin sa ating museo. Pati na rin po ang tandaan po na tahanan po ng ating mga pamana ang ating museo, kaya ingatan po natin ang mga bagay, mga sagisag na matatagpuan po sa ating museo. At ngayon po ay hayaan nating umalingaw-ngaw ang ating sariling musika mula dito sa ating bulwagan para sa pagtugtog ng kwintas ng sariling himig o Necklace of Our Own tune ni Cayetano Rodriguez. Narito po ang Philippine Women's University Jose Abad Memorial School, Rondalia, sa kumpas ni Noli Rodriguez. Palakpakan natin muli ang Philippine Women's University Jose Abad Santos Memorial School, Rondalia. At for our foreign guests, this is our version of the string ensemble, particularly taking primarily the instrument is called the bandurria. It is a 14-stringed 14-stringed instrument that's shaped like an egg. So you have there in front the bandurria. So muli palakpakan natin ang Philippine Women's University Jose Abad Santos Memorial School, Rondalia. At bubuksan ang ating komperensya ng isang iginagalang na scholar sa wika at kultura na magbibigay sa atin ng orientasyon sa halaga ng pagsusumikap natin bilang mga scholar at manggagawang pangkultura sa pangangalaga sa ating mga wika. Ipapakilala siya sa atin ni Attorney Ana Catarina B. Rodriguez, Direktor General ng Komisyon sa Wikang Filipino.
Good morning. I will also speak in Filipino, but the souvenir program has the English version. Simula noong 1972, si Michael Walsh ay nakapagsagawa ng fieldwork sa mga wika at kulturang Australian Aboriginal sa top end of Northern Territory, pangunahin sa rehiyon ng Darwin Valley. Ito ay magkahalong gawaing akademiko at consultancy simula noong 1979 na nakatuon sa mga usapin sa lupa ng Aborigine. Mula noong 1999, kasangkot na siya sa pagpapasigla ng mga wikang Aboriginal sa NSW or New South Wales. Mula noong 1982 hanggang 2005, bahagi siya ng kaguruan ng Departamento ng Linguistika ng University of Sydney. Ipinagpapatuloy niya ang kanyang mga interes, pampananaliksik sa pamamagitan ng mga grant ng ARC na kasama ang isang grupo ng mga linguistika at mga musicologist simula noong 2004 hanggang 2010. Mayroon siyang mahigit na 45 taong karanasan sa Aboriginal Australia, lalo na sa Northern Territory sa South Wales, at may pananaliksik din sa iba pang mga nasasakupang lugar maliban sa Victoria at Tasmania. Siya ay author, co-author, editor, co-editor ng 10 aklat o monograph collection na may nasulat na rin siyang mahigit 70 artikulo o mga kabanata ng aklat, 55 ulat para sa pamahalaan o consultancies, kasama na ang pagiging co-author ng NSW Aboriginal Languages K-10 syllabus noong 2003 at co-author ng Pambansang Balangkas para sa mga wikang Aboriginal at Torres Strait Islander. Nakapagsagawa na siya ng higit sa 20 daang presentasyon sa Australia at iba pang panig ng mundo tulad ng Canada, China, France, Germany, England, India, Italy, Lesotho, Myanmar, New Zealand, Portugal, Scotland, Singapore, South Africa, Spain, Tajikistan at Wales. At ngayon ay nandito po siya sa Manila, Philippines. Pinapakilala ko po si Ginoong Michael Walsh.
All right, many thanks for the introduction. Well, doesn't seem to be working. Oh, okay, right. Yep, all right. Thank you. All right, so why preserve the world's endangered languages? I'll jump straight to the conclusion. One of the reasons to preserve the world's endangered languages is because they're good for your health. And I'm talking there not just about Indigenous people, but non-Indigenous people as well. So in the state of New South Wales, for instance, there was a study carried out by the national government about 2012 it came out, that indicated that in the state of New South Wales at the time there were just under 8,000 students, school students, learning an Indigenous language. Now, given my background in Australian languages 20 years ago, I would not have predicted that, not in my wildest dreams. And what's really surprising about that nearly 8,000 speakers is that 4 out of 5 of those are non-Indigenous. So 80% of the students learning an Aboriginal language are non-Indigenous. I might say that that figure of nearly 8,000 is a very low estimate compared to what's going on now, because just for one language, Wiradjuri in central New South Wales, there are now at least 5,000 people learning that language, whether at school or at university or other settings. Right, okay. I thought I'd start by reminding us that we're in the Asia-Pacific region, we're sitting on a mountain of tongues. Nearly a quarter of the world's languages are spoken in this area, 700 to 900 languages in Papua New Guinea, about 250 in Australia, another 170 in Vanuatu, etc. So an immense number of languages. And that simply lays some of that out. I'm going to have to look at this as well. So for the Philippines, I'm just mentioning that there are various estimates, 120 to 187 languages in this part of the world. So it's a populous area which has its own particular problems. And that's just to remind us about the languages of the Philippines. Okay, I'm going to say a little bit about my own involvement. So back in 1972, I carried out my first field trip to a remote community in the Northern Territory, but along the way I worked on a language called Latakia, which is the traditional language of Darwin, the capital of the Northern Territory. About 40 years ago, I completed my PhD in linguistics. As mentioned in the introduction, I was a staff member in the linguistics department for over 20 years. But what's really significant is about 20 years ago, there was my conversion to the validity of language revival. So up until that time, I was basically sceptical. I felt that it's a nice idea, but in all the world's languages, possibly only Hebrew is the language which has been successful in terms of language revival. But why was I converted? Why did I become a true believer in language revival? I'll mention that in a minute, but basically there was a researcher working on, what's that? I need to be closer? Yeah, okay. All right. I moved away because I thought it was going to do feedback. Okay. That's all right. Okay, so around about 1997, a researcher at the University of Adelaide, Rob Amery, worked on a language of the Adelaide region called Ghana. At the time, it was only known as a few items of vocabulary and some stock phrases, and otherwise manuscript material from the first half of the 19th century. So essentially the language had declined considerably. Within 10 years, over 100 public speeches were being given in Ghana. By now, it's taught at all levels of education, from the earliest years through to post-secondary education, community colleges, university, and so on. Okay. So in 2018, I began involvement in a number of language revival activities. And that's the excerpt from Pandaigdigang by Rob Amory. If the PowerPoint is available later on, I've put a link there to this particular ethnography of language revival, which originally was published by a relatively obscure European publisher and was quite expensive. Now you just click the link and download the whole lot free of charge. So if you want a good read, that's what I'd recommend. So the 7 languages that I'm working on currently to various degrees are Bangala, which is a language west of Adelaide, where the emphasis is on mental health, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. Larrakia, the language of Darwin, I've put there the Filipino connection. Back in 1895, Antonio Cubillo came from the Philippines and settled in Darwin, 1895. In 1910, he married an Aboriginal woman of Larrakia descent. By 1915, he'd founded the Cubillo Brothers Guitar Orchestra. So I was pleased to see that this tradition is being followed. 1926, they founded the Cubillo Brothers string band, and that went on for another period of time. So some of these Larrakia descendants have essentially Filipino names: Juan, Ponciano, Roque, R-O-Q-U-E, and so on. Not what you'd expect particularly of Aboriginal Australians. In about 1993, the grandson of Antonio Cubillo, a man called Gary Lee, who's a social anthropologist, so he's been to the Australian National University and got his honours degree there. He wrote a play which was subtitled as a Filipino Larrakia love story. Within that particular play, there are 3 forms of speech being used: English, obviously, Tagalog, and Aboriginal English. And his sister, now called Billawara as an Aboriginal name, is spearheading the language revival of Larrakia. I'll be catching up with her again next week when I'm back in Darwin after this conference. Ngari Ngari is a language on the New South Wales-Victorian border, which has merely 27 words in terms of its total language documentation. You might think, what can you do with 27 words? One of the language activists, who's Ngari Ngari, is bursting with enthusiasm, and he says you can put the whole 27 words onto a water bottle, and one of the words will in fact be water. I'm thinking, well, okay, if that floats your boat, then so be it. The next one is Ngunnawal, which is the language of the Canberra ACT region. And back on February the 10th, 2016, usually I wouldn't remember such dates, but this one is prominent because the Prime Minister of Australia did an acknowledgement to country in Ngunnawal, a language that maybe 5 years ago was regarded as extinct. Next one is Wamba Wamba. This is one of the other languages I work on, where I'm compiling a learner's guide, and Wiradjuri working on a place names project, and Yorta Yorta, we're planning to digitise the learner's guide. So I'm mentioning all this because this is deeply personal, and it's one of the take-home messages from this talk, I think, is that the discourse of endangered languages is a fairly dismal one. It tends to be coloured by death, decline, despair. My particular discourse on language revival and endangered languages is very hopeful because I've seen so many languages come from essentially nothing to being in prominent use. So Wiradjuri 20 years ago was hardly spoken by anyone. Now over 5,000 people in New South Wales alone are learning the language. So this is an example of what Aboriginal Australia looks like. Like most of these language maps, but particularly Australia, I wouldn't say you should believe them, but it does at least give you an idea that there's more than one, which is the important message to take from it. Australia is a vast country with hardly any people in it. Sometimes when I'm giving talks in the United States, I mention the state of New South Wales and say, by Australian standards, it's a fairly small state, about the size of Texas. I then mention Alaska, which is about the same size as the Northern Territory. It's just that Alaska has had a population explosion. So it's a matter of populations and areas. I won't go through these in detail. I'm hoping that the organisers will make the PowerPoint available for people later on. Otherwise, just contact me and I'm happy to send it along. But essentially, Australia is a vast country with almost no people in it, and particularly Indigenous people do not live in remote parts of Australia for the main. About 80% of them are living in cities or regional areas and so on. What that means is that the bulk of Aboriginal people are not living on their own country, and there's a problem of the diaspora where you're trying to create, what we're trying to do is create virtual communities that join people up across the vast spaces of Aboriginal Australia. So I've mentioned the discourse of language revival, this kind of relentless litany of gloom and doom. We're told that in a National Indigenous Languages survey back in 2004, that only about 145 languages are still spoken. 18 languages are strong in the sense of being spoken by all age groups, and that means that at that time 232 languages were in various states of disrepair. The next National Indigenous Languages survey that came out in 2014 indicates there are 13 languages that are still strong in the sense that they're being learned by children, but of those, another 237 are going to be in various states of disrepair. But even the factor of 250 languages is in contention. So Claire Bowen has announced that there's about 363 Australian languages. Why these differing estimates? Well, it depends on what's a language and what's a dialect and that sort of thing. So the Australian census in 2006 indicated there were about 56,000 speakers all told. But most of these figures should be treated with some suspicion. One of the languages of New South Wales with which we're familiar, Komperensiya, is sometimes described as critically endangered and was even thought to be extinct at one time. By one estimate, which I believe because it's mine, it probably has hundreds of semi-speakers by now and has a lot more, even as reported in the Sydney Morning Herald on Monday this week, where, incredibly, in schools in New South Wales, Indigenous languages learned at school have overtaken Spanish. So there are languages like Komperensiya with 1,500 people learning it. Wiradjuri from central New South Wales, according to Ethnologue, has 100 speakers and is declared to be nearly extinct. And I realise the string orchestra is blocking off the bottom, so sorry about that. But what I'm saying is that at least 5,000 people are learning this language by now. Here are some estimates, and the point of this is simply to show you can't believe the figures. I won't go through them all in laborious detail, but let's try Gunwingu, for instance. 900 languages in a study of the loss of Australia's linguistic heritage back in about 1990, saying there are 900 speakers. The National Census of 1996 indicates there's been a sharp increase up to 1,400. 5 years later, disaster. We're now down to 961. Notice it's not 960 or 962, it's exactly 961. And then the National Indigenous Languages Survey of 2004, the number plummets to 47. What this sort of slide should indicate is that the best figures we've got are completely misleading. Goonwingu has hundreds of speakers, as a rough guess. So I just reiterate there, only 13 can be considered strong in the sense that they are learned by children as a matter of course. So there are a lot of government reports that come out in Australia, and most of them, let's say looking at Indigenous disadvantage, devote maybe a couple of pages out of 500 or whatever to languages. My view is that if you've got a 500-page report, maybe 20 pages can be devoted to health, education, and various other things, and the other 480 should be devoted to language, because that's essentially where the action happens to lie. So this report, the Social Justice Report of 2009, poses the question, why preserve Indigenous languages? Quite relevant to this particular conference. And this is, again, this particular item is available, freely downloadable online, so just Google Social Justice Report 2009 and go to chapter 3, and it's all about Indigenous languages. So why do it? It promotes resilience, improved health, improved cognitive functioning, increased employment options, intrinsic value, and so on. I'll skip over that. And I'll skip over these next two as well, because I'm conscious of the time ebbing away. But basically, studies have indicated that Aboriginal children who are immersed in their languages show more resilience than those that don't. But of particular relevance to me is the longitudinal research data which demonstrates a correlation between strong language and culture in Indigenous homeland communities and positive health outcomes. So the part that you can't read says conventional measures of employment, income, housing and education did not account for this health differential. Strong connections to traditional ways of life were the predictors for the better health outcomes. So who wrote this report? A bunch of heavily credentialed health professionals. It wasn't some starry-eyed linguist, although a lot of starry-eyed linguists are my best friends, but the idea is that this is what we're looking for. Other parts of the world, like British Columbia, Michael Chandler and his colleagues have looked at a correlation between strong retention of Aboriginal languages and reduced youth suicide. One of the dismal statistics about Aboriginal Australia is that it has the highest rate of, amongst Indigenous youth, the highest rate of suicide in the OECD. So if one can inject some Aboriginal language into people's lives, it has a major effect. People stay alive. I'll skip that. So the issue is whether the correlations are anything more than just correlations. Is there a direct cause between a positive relationship between the sustainability of Indigenous land, language and culture and an Indigenous person's subjective emotional well-being? Basically, Nick Biddle and Hannah Swee, who are demographers and real number crunchers, say it's a nice idea, but the evidence is lacking so far. But I'm peripherally involved in this particular study where Ray Lovett, who's a Ngiampaa man, so an Aboriginal man, and again you can't see it because of the double base, but he's a registered nurse, has a Bachelor of Nursing, Bachelor of Health Science, Master of Applied Epidemiology from Oxford, and an award-winning PhD in epidemiology. So he is conducting an open-ended longitudinal study that, amongst other things, looks at the effects of languages on health. Another heavily credentialed Aboriginal person is Alex Brown, who comes from the Yuin Nation in the south coast of New South Wales. He and Gillard Zuckerman are conducting a 5-year study funded by the National Health and Medical Research Council, looking at the reclamation of Bungala and its effects on health, particularly mental health. So again, what we've got here is a couple of starry-eyed linguists, myself and Gillard, me being an associate investigator on this project, and then a whole bunch of heavily credentialed health professionals. Our goal is to establish quantitatively a link between language reclamation and its positive effects on health, take that to the politicians and say, right, we're not just guessing, here are the numbers, and it's all by health professionals. So why should one learn Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander language? Improved health of the Indigenous community, mental, physical and social, reduced levels of Indigenous youth suicide, and decreased levels of racism towards the Indigenous community. There's a Vimeo that I won't show because of lack of time, but there's a link to it in the PowerPoint, which looks at, which shows in 3 minutes 4 Wiradjuri language teachers talking about their experience of teaching Wiradjuri language in the town of Parkes. Parkes is a country town in New South Wales that has a population of 10,000 people. Each week, 1,000 people in that town are learning Wiradjuri. One of the teachers explicitly says in the Vimeo that when she was growing up, there was lots of racism in Parkes, and she believes that since the language has been brought back, and particularly is being taught to non-Indigenous students, levels of racism have pretty well disappeared. Okay, I've got through that. The costs of racism. There's a curious article that came out about 2 years ago that demonstrates the very considerable costs of racism to the community. As much as in Australia, as much as 44.9 billion a year. Now, this economist, I've got no idea how he came up with these figures, but they look good if you're trying to demonstrate that there's a cost to racism. If we took that just to focus on the Aboriginal population, they're about 3% of the overall Australian population of 25 million, so that still gives you a saving of about 1.347 billion dollars Australian each year. We could then translate that into the US, where the cost of the US is just under 600 billion Australian dollars if you believe the proportionality that's involved. I want to mention that these instances of language revival, they're all fairly recent. Remember, my conversion took place about 20 years ago, and one of the ones that kicked it off was Ghana, the language of the Adelaide Plains. Gumbaynggirr, which I mentioned in passing, at Nambucca Heads, north coast of New South Wales, started in the mid-1980s. There are now hundreds of semi-speakers, if not more. Wiradjuri, central New South Wales, only from the 1980s, now over 5,000 people learning the language each year. Ngunnawal, the Canberra area, from there the Renaissance started in September 2013. Myself and a bunch of colleagues were involved in it, and that created the first time that a Prime Minister gave a speech in an Aboriginal language in Parliament. He's learnt the speech off by heart, so that he gives the speech from memory at various major occasions like Australia Day, January 2017. Unfortunately, he's just been kicked out, so what we're looking for is the next Prime Minister, hopefully, to learn an Aboriginal language as well. Yawarua, the one that you can't see, from the Broome area of Western Australia, began getting revitalised about 2013, and as of the 5th of October, so less than a week ago, I learnt from the director of a language centre, a guy called Peter Yu, which is another indication of how Aboriginal people have an Asian influence. The Yu surname is from Chinese, but there are many who are from Japanese, Malay, etc. Anyway, Peter Yu tells me as of the 5th of October there are currently 1,500 people being taught this language. 20 years ago I would have said absolutely impossible. So how do you go about language revival? There are various ways of producing it, but I thought for a general audience I'd just boil it down to the 4 basic steps. The first, which is crucial, is consultation. The second is is documentation. The third is analysis, and the fourth is what I've called pedagogification. I thought I'd invented this word, went to Google and found that it turned up hundreds of times, so it's not my invention at all. Maybe an independent invention, but there it is. It conforms to English word formation processes, so it has to be a real word, speaking as a person in linguistics, and it turns out that it's there in spades. I'm just going to give 2 very simple examples of documentation and analysis. These involve a couple of place names near Canberra, one of them called Mikalago in Australian English. So if we look at the first 10 or a dozen sources from the 19th century and then line them up letter by letter, what we find at the bottom, where you can't really read it, sorry about that, is that the analysis, the last 2 lines, basically are saying that Mikalago, in fact, if we look back into the phonetic past, sounded something like Medjilego, Medjilego. So the first guy, back in 1833, couldn't even get the first letter right, so everyone else has got an M, he's got an N. Even worse in some respects is Tidbinbilla, which is a tourist attraction just outside of Canberra. Again, the part that you can't read, right at the bottom, it turns out to be not Tidbinbilla, but Kinmenbilly, Kinmenbilly. So the last vowel is wrong, the first consonant is wrong, there's no tid, it's kin, and so on. So that's, in a nutshell, what documentation, the first 10 bits are, and analysis, the last 2. These are just very simple examples. Of course, it's a lot more difficult than that. And those examples are from Harold Koch. Again, this is an item that's available, freely downloadable. And this is the example from Wiradjuri. Along the bottom, where you can't see it, there's a link to a Vimeo that I've already mentioned. I want to turn now to some examples of Aboriginal languages being used in the wider domain. So, in the Northern Territory, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the government-funded broadcaster in Australia, from about 5 years ago began presenting a news bulletin in 3 Northern Territory languages. Yolngumatha from Northeast Arnhem Land, Walbury from Central Australia, and Creole, that's Kriol, which is an English-based Creole spoken by 20 to 30,000 people across Northern Australia. The basic take-home message is that on the left-hand side, you've got a particular arrangement. This is what ordinary broadcasters would be reading, and then it's re-scripted to be more suitable for Aboriginal listeners. So again, there are, along the top, you can see a a link to these Indigenous news services at your leisure. You can play today's news in one of these 3 Aboriginal languages. The fact that you don't know the languages is not a problem, neither do I, but what you'll find is that key items like Donald Trump will come out pretty much just like Donald Trump when that's being reported. So where are the speakers? I mentioned a bit earlier the diaspora of Aboriginal people in Australia. This goes to a language called Gamilaroi, which was traditionally spoken in, I'll even see if I can. Can't find it, okay. Gamilaroi was spoken in north central New South Wales, that's the shaded area. And basically there's a virtual community delivered in terms of Facebook where people who are over in Perth, there are 7 of them there, about more than half the total population as of I think it was May 2017, who were learning Wiradjuri and engaging in Facebook, lived outside their traditional country. So this is a way of creating opportunities for people even when they're not in the same place. Another instance of extending the use of the language is Morimpatta. This is the language that I did my PhD on, starting in 1972. And in magistrates' courts, there were instances where, for instance, the English term bail, B-A-I-L, a simple English word, Aboriginal people would be talked at for some time by a bunch of lawyers. Then the Aboriginal person was handed a sheet of paper and told, you can go now. The piece of paper was the bail obligations. The Aboriginal person typically would throw the piece of paper away or into the fire, and 6 weeks later gets arrested and put in jail again. So what happened? What's gone wrong? So what we have to do is take that English word bail, just 4 letters, and create a story that unpacks exactly what that is. So the guy who did this in particular is Dominic McCormack, who grew up with his brother. Both parents were school teachers, so 99 out of 100 of his fellow students were native speakers of Morimpatta, so he got to be a native speaker as well. He then went off and became a lawyer, and so now he's using that knowledge of Morimpatta to explain terms like manslaughter, bail, etc., etc. Moving to another domain, that of health, the Yolngu have created a medical and anatomical dictionary that includes terms like leukocyte. Now the thing about leukocyte is that lots of members of the public may have heard the term, and you get a gold star if you can say, oh, it's white blood cell. Okay, but what does a white blood cell do? And that's what the definition in the Yolngu version does. It, if you like, creates a narrative about the term leukocyte and liver and sphygmomanometer, the term for blood pressure machine. Why do Yolngu people need to know these terms? Well, they need to be on the same page, literally, as the non-Indigenous health professionals. So those are just a couple of examples of that. Another example of extending the range of a language is Nyungar from the southwest of Western Australia. There's an actor called Kylie Farmer who's a professional actor and a Nyungar language activist. She's translated a number of Shakespearean sonnets into Nyungar, a language that 20 years ago was regarded as more or less extinct. If you go to that link, you'll be able to find an example of a broadcast on ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, where she and her non-Indigenous actor colleague, Kate Mulvaney, interchange. So Kylie does it in Nyungar, and then Kate Mulvaney does the other version in English. bit after Kylie had gone on national television and presented these Shakespearean sonnets, I asked her, well, what have you got in mind next? And she sort of drew a sigh and said, well, now I've got to translate Macbeth into Nyungar. And given that she only had a baby about 6 months ago, I thought, well, that's not going to go anywhere. Ran into her husband about a week ago, and he said, Kylie's over in Perth rehearsing with the Aboriginal actors so that they all know what the Nyungar version of Macbeth means, because it's a bit hard to act a part if you don't understand what you're saying. Another example of extending the use of an Aboriginal language is Pintupi literature, which is from Central Australia, a bit to the sort of northeast of Alice Springs. Here the challenge was to translate the International Declaration of Human Rights into an Aboriginal language. The very word rights is problematic, leaving aside international declaration, and of is more or less okay, but you can see that most of the words are going to be a problem. Again, this is something where you can go to the source to see how the translation gets unpacked. But the term for morally right, straight, hearing good, explicated as the right way of thinking. And what you'll see there is that the hearing and listening modality, if you like, is really what Pintupi literature people and most other Aboriginal people regard as the key to knowledge and learning. So we have in English an expression, in the mind's eye. There's a brilliant paper by two linguists, Nick Evans and David Wilkins, called In the Mind's Ear, because basically when I was first attempting to learn an Aboriginal language, as our opener was saying, people would say chewier, meaning bad ear, and that also indicates that you're fairly stupid. Not only can't you hear what's being said, but you know nothing. So what I hoped to do eventually was to get to be chepata, good ear, but I'm still working on that. So you'll see a couple of other examples of listening as relevant to items like reason or conscience. I thought I'd mention a kind of wish list for successful language revitalisation programs. This is my own list, and there's a link there to the freely downloadable chapter in a book that I co-edited. You can buy the hard copy if you like. It's not going to make much difference because the royalties won't really go anywhere. But what I'm getting at is that this is a book about revitalising Australian languages, maybe 40 chapters, about half of which involve Indigenous people, and it's all out there, available free of charge. But Christmas is coming, so if you want to buy a hard copy, it's still fairly cheap, and you'd be something to put in the Christmas stocking perhaps. So these are more or less in order of importance, where one of the items that is crucial is community cohesion. Essentially what I'm saying there is that some language revitalisation programs don't go anywhere simply because the community is tearing itself apart. And I won't name the ones that are like that, but basically the Gumbaynggirr, one of the big success stories for language revival back in the, starting from the mid-1980s, essentially what they've done from day one is emphasise this community cohesion. We can have squabbles about land issues and all sorts of other things, but when it comes to language, let's all work as one. Another item is overcoming the genetic fallacy, I think disguised by the drum kit. The genetic fallacy is basically a term used by Nora and Richard Dauenhauer, where Nora Dauenhauer is a Tlingit elder and her husband is, I think, a teacher of German, He's a white fella anyway. But the thing is, Nora, being an Indigenous leader and Indigenous elder, is allowed to say things that I can't really say. Essentially, the genetic fallacy is the belief amongst some Indigenous people that by being born into that language heritage, you are thereby able to learn the language more readily than other people and also teach it. I am not a trained language teacher, so I mean, I love English to bits, but and I'm a native speaker, a pretty good one, I think, but I don't know how to teach it to other people. So something as simple as the distinction between I ate it and I have eaten it. You can try me. I've got no idea why I use one on one occasion and the other on the other occasion. I can do it right 99 times out of 100, but I've got no idea of what I'm doing because I'm merely a native speaker. One of the very last items I've put there is funding. I've left it until last because in my view, while financial support is very useful, it's not what I would see as a primary ingredient for success. There are programs out there where they've been given stacks of funding and they've basically gone nowhere, and the one right next door has no funding at all and is going gangbusters. Now, this is not to say that I eschew money. It's great when there's money around, but don't wait for the money, just get going on it straight away. So, Arla's, in fact, has written an article about what to do in language revival before the money arrives, and that's an important issue. This is an ironic statement, technology saves. Sometimes people think in language revival that all you need is the technology. Virtual communities, I've mentioned in connection with Facebook and the Gamilaroi, that is a way of bringing people together across the wide spaces. Augmented reality, a lot of you have heard about virtual reality, but augmented reality is where we're basically adding to the reality that you're seeing. And that's what we're hoping to deploy on the Wiradjuri Place Names project. That's to say, if you're looking with your own eyes at a particular place, the augmented reality will add all that other background contextual information, including what was there 50 or 100 years ago, and thus add to one's view of reality. Again, the drum kit knocks it out, but social robotics. This is a project that started about a year ago in Ngukur, or Roper River, in the Northern Territory. Said, look, I'm a specialist in linguistics and Australian languages, but I'm not big on IT. Is OPI hard to use? No, any idiot can do it. Good, well, I'll get on with it. And can I shovel any language I like into there? Yeah, and it's easy. Next question, is it expensive? No. So my intention is to deploy OPI and social robotics in the revival of